Please say your name.
George Bartik.
When and where were you born?
Cumberland, Maryland, 1926, July the 28th. My childhood was pretty rough because it was during the Depression or right after it. It was during, and things was hard to come by, and I remember times when I'd come home from school, and the only thing we had there to eat would be 2 slices of bread and ketchup. And I'd put that in there, and it tasted great then. And I still every now and then have to go get it and see how it still tastes. And we got our coal, we had a coal stove, and we would go down along the railroad. We lived about, maybe 200 feet, maybe 200 yards, something like that from the railroad. And the guy that lived next door to me, when the train coal car would come in, they'd throw the big lumps off on the ground, and that's what we would go get and bring it up. And if it hadn't have been for the railroad and the coal, we'd have been in trouble.
Was that a common practice among people?
Yeah, everybody did it. And they had bulls then on the railroad, which was a cop. They didn't pay no attention. They knew what the problem was, and that's why they didn't bother us. And I had a little red wagon at that time, and I'd take that with me, and Mom would get the coal and put it in a bag, and then we'd pull it up home. It wasn't a great time to be a young fella.
Okay, so were you drafted into the military or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted 2 months before I was 18, and the reason I did it, I didn't like the idea of having to dig a hole, get out there and dig a foxhole or where it was. And when I enlisted, everybody that was getting drafted and going in was going in the Army, and they was all going to Europe. And it was going to be cold, and I didn't like that part either. So that's why I went and enlisted.
Where'd you go to high school?
Fort Hill, went to high school, yeah. I didn't finish because I went in 17, and when I come back, I went back to school in 46, and I think I lasted maybe 2 weeks, and the teacher asked me a question about King George III or something like that. And I told her, I said, the only George I'm worried about is me. And I left. So then I went and got a diploma later on.
So how did you choose which branch of the military you were going to join?
Just what I told you about the not wanting to go dig holes like they do in the Army and the cold. And like I say, everybody was going to the Army and going to Europe.
Okay.
I was 5'6.5" and 125 pounds of dynamite.
Okay, so where were you first deployed after basic training?
Beg your pardon?
Where were you first deployed after basic training?
I still didn't.
Where were you first deployed?
Oh, what we wasn't, okay, we was, after basic training, the first place I went to was to Miami. And they taught us how to abandon ship. And they had a couple 40 millimeter guns. They taught us how to shoot that. And when you jump off a ship, you have those K-pot life jackets. And they wanted to make sure that you held it here, because when you hit the water, that thing was going to come up. And there was a possibility of injuring yourself. And from there, we went to Galveston, Texas, and there was a ship there waiting on us. Is that okay if I go with that? Yeah. They had a ship there waiting on us, and it was a tanker, and it was the AOG 22, and his name was Watauga, Wautauga. And we was there for about 2 weeks operating the ship and learning all about it. And we left there, went down through the Gulf of Mexico. I got sick the first 3 days, and after that they could have turned it upside down and it wouldn't have made no difference. We went through the Panama Canal, and we went to we went to San Diego and got ammunition and fuel for the ship. And we left San Diego and went to Hawaii. And then we went from Hawaii to Johnson Island. It was where we loaded the ship up with, at that time, was gasoline and oil. And from there we went, let's see, where did we go? We went to Saipan. We went to Saipan and Tinian and Guam. And we put fuel in those different islands. And for a while we was sort of like stationed at Saipan. And I don't know whether you want to, I met a friend of mine in Saipan. I knew he was there, and he was a neighbor. And I went and got the permission from the captain to take the whaleboat in and see if I could find him. And I run into a guy in a Jeep right there, and he said, well, I know where they're camped at. And so he took me there, but they wasn't there. And I left a note for his sergeant was there, and I said, have him get in touch with me. I'm on the tanker in the harbor. And later on that night he did. He come down, and I went in and got him, brought him out on the ship, and we was having dinner at that time. And we had an air raid alert. And the ships had to go out in the harbor, get out of the harbor. And my general quarter station was on a twin 40 millimeter cannon. And he asked me, what do I do? And I said, get down in there and hand up ammunition. And you got to clear your guns, make sure they're ready to shoot. And I fired 2 shots, and my buddy come up out of that hole a hollering. He said, I don't want in there, I want someplace I can dig a hole. So that was, I enjoyed that. I'm not sure he did, but I did. And the rest of 1944, we just went from all kind of islands, and so many of them I can't even remember the names. And I remember Annotations and Bellini, I think it was, and that's the one where later in the world they tested one of the atomic bombs. And that's all I can remember of them. But we visit so many of them. And what we'd do, we'd go in and we'd go in a harbor or close to the island, and there would be a buoy there. You know what a buoy is? And we'd pick that up, and there'd be a hose attached to it that run to the island. And we'd hook up, and if it was gasoline, we'd pump gasoline, and if it was fuel oil, or whether it was diesel oil or lubricating oil. And we did that at all those islands at that time, and that took up basically all of 44. And then we went to a atoll called Ulysses, and we at Ulysses, I think it was November or December of 44. And I believe the whole Navy was in there. It was a huge place. And while we was there was a Japanese submarine come in with one of the ships while the nets was open. And when he got in there, the ship he fired at and sunk was a tanker. And we was all there together, and that thing burnt for days. And that submarine never got out. They closed the nets, and he couldn't get out, so he get no air. And when they come up, all the Japanese enlisted men jumped over the side and drowned themselves. The only person they got was the captain. In April 13th, we had left and come back. There was 3 planes, kamikaze planes, come over, and they hit one of the destroyers and busted it up. And then later on, I think it was about a week later, they come back again and sunk one of the carriers, which was, they called it a jeep carrier, which just a smaller one, that's all the difference was. And then when we went back to Saipan again, and for a while, not too long, because we went to Okinawa, where they were invading it on April the 1st. And that's what they did. They invaded it. And they would take us, and there was a couple islands off of the west of Okinawa, and they had put us in that island, and we was camouflaged, so they couldn't see not only our tanker, but all the tankers that was around. They had them camouflaged over there, so the kamikaze couldn't see us. And they never even approached us. They was after the carriers, and mostly the carriers, and they had DEs and destroyers was about 100 miles further up towards Japan, and they wanted to sink them because they was broadcasting when the kamikazes was coming, and they was warning the American ships. And I think I read someplace that the kamikazes had sunk something like 800 ships, sunk and damaged 800 ships. Thank God for the atomic bomb. That saved a lot of lives, because they was counting, they was saying it'd probably be 10 million casualties to go there. And some of those little islands, when we was camouflaged at, when we first went there, every little boat that had an engine on it, they had some kind of a bomb on it, and they were going to go out and try to sink the ships, and they didn't get to use them, thankfully. I think it was February 45, they sent me home. Ray! And when I got home, we went into St. Pedro, and then they put us in a hotel in Los Angeles till we could get money to come home. And I went to get paid, and I give them my number, and they said, well, we don't have no money here for you. We got one. My last 2 digits was 62, and 62, and they had one for 61. I had no money to go home. And I thought to myself, well, what do I do now? And I was going to go to the Red Cross, but one of the guys that come home with me, it was on my ship, he asked me how much it was, and I told him $62. And he gave me the $62, and he said, when you get the money, send it to me. And that's all I had. I didn't have no money at all, but I didn't need it because the train had civilians on it, and when I'd go into the car for the food, and I guess the guy that was there told them that I didn't have no money, and they paid for my food, the civilians, and was thanking me for what I did. And that took, I don't know, 2 days to get home. And when I got to Chicago, we got to the B&O, and before I got on the taxi cab to take me to the B&O station, and he took me around the same block 4 times. And when I got out, there was a cop standing there, and I didn't have to tell him. He saw what was happening, and he told me, "Buddy, the B&O station's only down there about 500 yards," and he said, "You go get on it. I'll take care of him, and he'll take care of your bill too." And I got on the B&O, and man, what a difference in the railroad. The girls that was on there working, they give me blankets and pillows, and I didn't have to pay for no food either. They took care of me till I got home, and they told me I got home real early in the morning, and they woke me up and told me, "Come on, it's time for you to get off." And when I got off, my mother and father was there, and my dad's a little guy like me, and he tried to throw my sea bag up on his shoulder, and he didn't do very good at that. So I threw it up on my shoulder and carried it to, I'm not sure how I got home, whether I got home by a taxi or whether my uncle picked me up. And that's my story.
Is there someone that you served with that you remember fondly?
Yeah, I served with Bryson Beal from Frostburg, and he's a guy, I think that he was a yeoman, and I think he's the guy that put his number down 61 instead of 62 while I didn't have no money. And when we went to enlist, I had a friend that went with me by the name of Art Oral, and one leg of his was smaller than the other, and they wouldn't take him. But as he was walking down the hall, and there was about 500 of us, and you're all naked, and this officer come, and he saw him, he said, "Well, I got a leg just like that." My buddy, he got upset about that because they wouldn't take him, but the officer, the only place he was going was there because he was a doctor, and they let him be in the service. And I got another story. My neighbor was on site. Did I tell you about the? Yeah, I told you. Well, I also, it happened at Saipan too. My cousin from Baltimore, and he was in the Navy too, and he was on the USS Fanning, a destroyer. And when we were going out, and he was coming into the harbor, and I knew the ship, and I got the signal over to tell, his name was Robert Davison, to get on the fantail, and all I got to do was go, "Hi, cuz," and that was it.
Your major leaders during the war, like an admiral or major general?
I think I might have it written down here. I know one of them was Halsey. He was an admiral. Nimitz, Halsey, and Stark. And the guy that was over me on the tanker, his name was, got to think about it. I lost a thought what his name was. I had it there a while ago, but it's gone. He was from Pennsylvania, and he was a lieutenant. Don't have it. It might pop in.
While you were deployed, were there any things that you and your other sailors did for fun?
It wasn't too much fun.
Yeah.
Wasn't no place that's fun that I was at. I wasn't on. You didn't get liberty. The only place you got liberty was on an island. Was nothing there, and they'd give you 2 bottles of beer if you drank, or 2 Cokes if you didn't drink. And I didn't drink, so I take the Coke.
Can you describe how you felt coming home after the war?
I felt good. I was ready to come home, and when I got discharged, they offered me. They wanted people to stay, and I was a third-class petty officer, ship fitter, and they said they'll make me first class if I'd re-up for 4 years. I'm going home. And when I was to go home, the railroad was on strike, and they dropped us off on Route 40, and I was there for maybe, I'll say 15 minutes, and a trucker stopped, and he wanted, where you want to go? I said, I want to go to Cumberland, Maryland. He said, boy, you're lucky, that's right where I'm going. And he brought me, I lived right off of South Street, and he brought me down South Street and dropped me off, and I lived on Montreal Avenue. And I got off and walked right to my house. That was luck.
Okay, so how did you imagine military life before you joined, and then how did your perceptions of it change once you left?
I really wasn't know what it would be. And what I thought it would be was just about what it was. They take the little boy out of you and make you a man real quick. And the other thing they give me in boot camp was a razor. I'd never shaved, but I did from that day on. And what was the last part of your question?
How did your perceptions change after serving of the military?
Well, I wouldn't want to do it over again, but if I had to go into service for the reason I went in, I would do it again right now.
How do you think your time in the military affected you?
Made me a man, and everything you look for when you're a boy is gone. Everything is different. And I was asked somebody asked me if everybody treated you any different, and I didn't notice no different at all. There wasn't no parades, there wasn't nothing. You come home and that was it. Was go back to work if you had worked before that. Everything went right back to normal.
Who has been the most influential person in your life?
Wow. I guess my mother and my pastor. He would write to me, and my mother taught me everything I needed to know. I'm not sure that I passed her tests, but I did the best I could. I got one little other story before. When I come home, they give me 30-day leave. And after 30 days, they told me to report to the Naval gun factory in Washington. I thought, what's going on there? So what they did is they put me on Admiral King's yacht. That's where he supposedly stayed at night. And when he would come aboard, they'd blow a whistle and they wanted everybody to go below. They didn't even want you to look at him. And the reason they took 12 of us and brought us back to take, it was a USS Dauntless PC-61, and to take it to Norfolk to decommission it. They had sailors on there, and I don't understand what they let them go, and we had been overseas, and they had never been any place but at the Potomac River, and I found out later that they were all congressmen's sons and that kind of thing. They had about 4 rows of ribbons because everything that King was attached to, which was everything, if I did something over there, they got the ribbon for it. I think I got 3 or 4 ribbons and 2 battle stars. And that didn't sit well with me, but I was out of there then. So, and all we did was take the ship to Norfolk, decommission it, and that's when I went to Norfolk, and I went to Bainbridge and was discharged.
Where'd you end up working after the war?
Wow. Railroad, Kelly, ABL, Crown, Cork, and Seal. I was a machinist. The aircraft factory, Fairchild, I think it was, in Hagerstown. I worked in the back shop, and I always said when they knew you had $200 in the bank, they'd furlough you. And I don't think that was the way it was, but they furlough you a lot. And every time I'd get furloughed, I'd go someplace and get a job. And I ended up actually at the Celanese, and that's where I retired from.